Shadows beneath Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is not simply a mountain. It is a presence, a cathedral of stone and ice, older than memory and more patient than death. The first time I stood at its base, I felt less like a climber preparing for ascent, and more like a trespasser entering a crypt. The sheer whiteness of its slopes glared against the sky, almost painful to look at, and the vast glaciers that spilled down its sides reminded me of frozen rivers that had been bleeding for centuries but never stopped. The locals spoke of it as a graveyard. Airplane wreckage, bodies of climbers, fragments of lives all swallowed into the ice only to re-emerge decades later, spat out from the glacier's mouth like half-digested offerings. I had read about it in newspapers, strange discoveries appearing suddenly after years of silence. Shoes still holding feet, watches still ticking after time itself had given up, a hand clutching nothing but snow. I told myself I was here for the climb, for the challenge, but as I traced the trail upward into the silence of Mont Blanc's flanks, I carried with me a hollow anticipation. Each step sounded too loud in the snow. The crunch beneath my crampons echoed as though the glacier itself was listening. My breath steamed against my face, coating the edges of my goggles with moisture that immediately froze, framing the world in ice crystals. The smell was the first thing that unsettled me. High altitudes are supposed to smell of nothing, only clean air stripped bare of Earth's scents. But here, beneath Mont Blanc's glacier, the air was heavy with something else. Metallic, sharp, a tang that clung to the inside of my throat. Not the freshness of snow, but the memory of blood and rust, faint but inescapable. Light filtered strangely through the clouds above. At times the mountain appeared almost translucent, as if the ice itself was not solid but glass, holding shapes within it. As I pressed upward, I thought I saw shadows deep in the blue of the glacier walls, elongated outlines that suggested bodies suspended inside, their details blurred but their presence undeniable. Every time I blinked, they dissolved into nothing more than ice and snow. Hours passed like this, and the silence grew thicker. Mont Blanc does not allow sound to linger. It devours it, swallows the smallest scrape of an axe, the shortest exhale, until the only noise left is your own pulse thundering behind your ears. It became impossible to separate the rhythm of my heart from the creaking groan of the glacier shifting beneath me. I reached a cavern then, a hollow carved into the ice, and for a moment, I stepped inside to escape the wind. The interior smelled stronger, a suffocating metallic staleness that hung heavy in the frozen air. My headlamp cut through the darkness, and the beam caught something half buried in the floor. A fragment of metal twisted like a broken wing, its surface polished by years of ice movement. Beside it, something darker protruded from the frozen ground. It took me too long to realize it was leather. A shoe, still intact, though the flesh inside had shriveled to a shadow of what it once was. The laces were gone, stripped away by time, but the shape was unmistakably human. I staggered backward, nearly slipping, the crunch of my boots echoing in the hollow chamber. The ice groaned. The cavern shivered as though disturbed, and for a heartbeat, I thought I heard something else, something that did not belong to shifting ice. It was faint, muffled, but human. A voice straining through the weight of centuries, pressed into the ice, calling not for help but for release. I turned off my lamp then, foolishly, as if darkness would protect me. The blackness that followed was overwhelming, absolute. I could feel the presence around me, the weight of frozen shadows pressing close, suffocating, their forms shifting just beyond sight. My breath rasped in shallow bursts, each exhale a ghost that drifted no further than my face. When I finally forced the light back on, the cavern appeared unchanged. The twisted metal, the shoe, the blue walls of ice rising like translucent coffins. But I could not shake the certainty that I was not alone, that something had pressed itself against the inside of the glacier walls, waiting, listening, watching with eyes long since closed. I fled the cavern, stumbling back into the biting wind, but the feeling clung to me as I climbed higher. Every ledge seemed narrower, every gust colder, every patch of snow deeper. The smell never left me. The tang of metal clung to the air, no matter how far I rose, as though the entire mountain were bleeding slowly, invisibly. By the time I reached the higher slopes, exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision. The snow stretched endless and featureless, but the silence beneath it was alive. I began to see shapes in the white, figures walking just beyond the ridge, outlines bending against the wind, yet leaving no prints in the snow. Some moved with jerks and snaps, as though suspended on ropes that had long since broken. At one point, I glanced down and saw impressions in the snow beside mine, boot prints, fresher than they had any right to be. They followed my path, weaving in and out of my steps, overlapping in unnatural ways, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, as though more than one had been tracking me. I stopped. The prints stopped. I walked. They resumed. The higher I climbed, the stronger the whispers became. Not words exactly, but the suggestion of words, sounds muffled by ice and distance. They threaded through the air, carried by no wind, forming a chorus of broken breaths. My chest tightened, lungs struggling as if the mountain itself were squeezing them shut. I turned back at last, unable to continue. The summit gleamed in the distance, but it felt less like a goal and more like a lure, something placed there to draw me deeper into the mountain's hunger. Descending, I could feel the shadows following, pressing close against my back. The prints beside mine grew more chaotic, crossing over, circling, then vanishing entirely. When I reached the base, the world seemed unchanged. The village roofs glistened with snow, the wind carried wood smoke, and distant lights flickered warmly. But Mont Blanc loomed above, pale and immense, its glaciers hiding more than ice. I looked back one last time. The slope gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and for a breath, I thought I saw faces within it, dozens of them, blurred and half-formed, watching from behind the ice. Their eyes were closed, but I knew they felt me. The mountain remembers. It does not forgive. The shadows beneath Mont Blanc are never gone. They wait, patient as the ice itself, until another soul climbs too high, breathes too deep, listens too long. Then the silence claims them, and the glacier swallows them whole, to wait decades or centuries before spitting out their remains like echoes of a warning that was never heard. And when the wind dies, when the night is clear, you can still hear them, those faint voices frozen into the walls of Mont Blanc, calling through the ages in tones that are not pleading, not hopeful, but resigned. They do not want rescue. They want company. Echoes of the Alpine Graves. The Alps are not a single mountain range. They are a labyrinth, an ancient spine of stone that stretches across nations, their peaks like jagged teeth tearing into the sky. To most who come here, the Alps are beauty. The crisp air, the slopes bathed in sunlight, the villages nestled like small lanterns in valleys below. But I did not come for beauty. I came for silence. What I found was not silence at all, but echoes. It begins in the air, long before the snowfields or the glaciers. Even in the lower forests, the sound carries strangely. Your boots crunching against frost-dusted earth do not fade naturally. They rebound, reshaped, distorted, as though there are chambers hidden beneath the soil, vaults carved by something other than ice and time. The birds do not sing here. The branches creak, but do not break. The silence between each sound is not empty, it is waiting. I thought it was my imagination at first. I had been climbing alone too long, and solitude bends perception. Yet the further I went into the high passes, the more insistent the echoes became. My axe striking rock was not answered by the mountain's voice, but by something softer, delayed, as if there were hands deeper inside, mimicking me. Snow began to fall lightly as I ascended. Each flake hissed as it landed, building into a steady curtain that blurred the world around me. The landscape folded into gray, and the trail vanished under a fresh sheet of white. My breaths came harsh, dry in my throat, carrying the faint sting of cold metal. I remember pausing, pulling my scarf tighter, and catching that smell again. Iron rust, the suggestion of blood carried on the wind. It was not the first time I had smelled it. It seems to cling to the high Alps. There are graves here, hundreds of them, buried beneath ice that shifts like a living thing. Climbers swallowed decades ago emerge without warning, their faces waxy but intact, as if the mountain releases them only when it chooses. I had seen photographs of them in books, eyes clouded, skin stretched, boots still laced. But books cannot convey the scent, nor the weight of air thickened by history. I pressed upward, my body heavy with exhaustion. The trail led me into a narrow couloir, a gash in the mountainside where walls of rock rose sheer on either side. Snow drifted in strange patterns here, swirling in pockets as though the wind followed its own design. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing between the cliffs, layering on top of one another until I felt as though a dozen others walked behind me. I dared not look back. The couloir opened into a plateau, wide and featureless, the snow unbroken but for faint impressions. At first, I thought they were natural depressions, shadows from uneven ice, but when I bent closer, I realized they were footprints. Not fresh, not crisp, but preserved in a way snow should never allow. Rows of them, some large, some small, leading toward the glacier's edge. I followed them. I should not have, but curiosity gnawed at me stronger than fear. They wound across the plateau, circling, splitting, converging again, the tracks of a group that had no order, no purpose. Some prints overlapped in impossible ways, as though the same foot had stepped in two directions at once. I tried to match my stride to theirs, but the size and depth shifted constantly, forcing me to stumble. As I neared the edge of the glacier, the echoes began again. Faint at first, a whisper beneath the wind. My own steps, but delayed, repeated in softer tones. Then other noises, the drag of something heavy across snow, the rasp of breath not my own, the faint creak of ropes straining under weight. I froze, holding my breath. The mountain did not. The sounds continued, moving around me, encircling. Light shifted above, clouds parting for a brief moment, and I saw it in the ice. Faces. Dozens of them pressed against the glacier wall, distorted but unmistakable, eyes closed, mouths half open, as though caught in mid-breath. Some were smooth, blurred by time, but others looked freshly carved, their details too sharp to be ancient. I staggered backward, axe clattering against my harness, the metallic sound ringing too loud in the still air. The faces did not vanish when I blinked. They seemed to lean closer, as if the ice had thinned and they were pushing forward. The echoes swelled then, no longer simple repetitions but whispers. The cadence of voices buried and broken, speaking not to me but around me, beneath me, through me. Their tone was not pleading. It was resigned, tired, a chorus of acceptance that chilled me more than any plea for help. I turned away, but the snowfield had changed. The footprints were everywhere now, surrounding me in concentric rings. Each one seemed fresher, sharper, leading not toward safety but toward the shadows beneath the glacier. My lungs burned as I tried to breathe. The metallic tang thickened, overwhelming, until each inhale tasted like rust scraping the back of my throat. I forced myself down the slope, stumbling, half falling, desperate to escape the plateau. The whispers followed, not closer, not louder, but constant, threading through the silence like veins of wrought through stone. My vision narrowed to the rhythm of my steps, each plunge of the axe into snow a lifeline. Yet even then, I felt the weight of eyes closed long ago, pressing against my back. When I finally reached the lower slopes, the world seemed unreal. Villages still twinkled in the valley, smoke curled from chimneys, and the mountains glowed faintly in the fading light. But I knew what lingered above. I knew what waited beneath. The graves in the Alps are not silent. They never were. They echo endlessly, not in mourning, not in hope, but in patience. The mountain remembers. And if you listen too long, if you breathe too deeply, if you place your steps where others fell, you become part of its memory. A new echo added to the chorus beneath the ice, waiting for centuries until the glacier releases your shape to terrify another wanderer. The Alps are not a range of peaks. They are a mausoleum. Every path is a corridor, every summit a ceiling, every crevasse a doorway into chambers not meant to be disturbed. And the echoes of the Alpine Graves are still growing.